If you have a child who struggles to learn to read or to become a fluent reader, or maybe you just have a reluctant reader who doesn't seem to find a book that they're ever actually interested in, you've scoured the shelves, you've tried different things, and maybe you're feeling a little discouraged. And so today I'm going to share a few of my best tips as the mom who has a couple reluctant or struggling readers, some of our favorite books that have captured the imagination of various of my children as they began to be independent readers. And I'm really hoping this brings some encouragement and some much needed perspective, because I feel like this can be a place where moms can feel really overwhelmed and discouraged. So I hope you leave this video feeling encouraged and equipped to encourage your children to become readers. If you're new around here, my name is Amy Sloan. I'm a second-generation homeschooling mom of 5, including a homeschool graduate. This year in our homeschool, I will still be homeschooling a 4th grader, 7th grader, 9th grader, and a new senior, a 12th grader. I love to encourage moms at humilityanddoxology.com and through my homeschool conversations with Humility and Doxology podcast, and of course, here on YouTube. Now, something you should know about me is I am myself a voracious reader. I love to read books with my eyes. I'm a very quick reader. It has never been something that was a struggle for me, and it was something that I anticipated would be a shared experience with my children. And so as I began homeschooling my first child, he was a very early reader, a voracious reader. It went so easily, and I was sure it was because, of course, I was such a good homeschool mom, right? And isn't that the way the Lord loves to humble us and teach us many things? Just like my first child loved broccoli and my second one didn't. It had nothing to do with how I introduced them to nutrients. I have since had children who have just not been a big fan of reading. We call it reading with your eyes to distinguish it from reading with your ears, and I'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute. But that was a big surprise for me and has actually been a challenge. I've had to learn that it's okay that not every child is excited about reading in the same way that I am. That doesn't mean they don't love stories. It doesn't mean they don't have a good imagination, and it doesn't mean that they don't love to learn. They just may learn in a different way than I do. And then for my children for whom reading has been an actual struggle, there have been challenges just in decoding the words. I've learned that they are not hampered from or kept from the joy of reading and the joy of stories, even though it's going to take a lot more work and patience on my part as the mom and the homeschool teacher. Okay, so let's start with a few general tips for encouraging your reluctant or struggling reader. And I gave you a little hint just a minute ago, and that is not to be afraid to include lots of audiobooks and read-alouds in your reading time. In our family, we call it reading with your ears, as opposed to reading with your eyes if you have a book in front of you. And I've made a choice to use that terminology because I really want all of my children to think of themselves as readers, as those who love to read, whether or not the physical act of reading with their eyes is struggle or enjoyable or not, they can still view themselves as readers, as lovers of books. And so we include copious amounts of audiobooks for all of my children. But it has been especially valuable for children whose ability to read with their eyes is far below grade level. It means that they can go on and listen to very complicated literature and beautiful stories that are far advanced from their ability to decode with their eyes. And so that's really important, and I encourage you to view that as reading. Take the physical act of reading, practice, which is important, and set that aside. That's a separate skill. Okay, but when it comes to just learning a love of words, a love of language, fill your children's ears with beautiful stories, living books, rich language. You can, of course, use Audible, and my children often use their Kindles or our Echo Dots to access those audiobooks. And our library actually also has the Libby app, which you can basically check out an e-audiobook, kind of like you would check out a book from the library. And so that can be a really great tool as well. Okay, the second tip I have for you is to assign amount of time to read rather than page numbers. If you have a child for whom reading with their eyes is a struggle or a challenge and something they just dread or don't enjoy, and you give them a certain number of pages to read, it can feel really overwhelming. Instead, say, today I want you to read with your eyes for 10 minutes. Maybe that's all they can handle when you're first starting this practice. And you can gradually increase the time. We're actually working on that right now with my youngest son, with the goal of having him be able to get to an hour of independent reading this upcoming school year. Right now, we have managed to get to 45 minutes. It has not always been easy, especially in the midst of some of his hospitalizations and treatments, but it's going well. We started very small, though, with 10 minutes, then 15 and 20. And have gradually increased that length of time. But by giving a time, the child knows there is a definite end. That timer is going to go off, and it has really encouraged my children to give them that timer requirement rather than a certain number of chapters or pages or things like that. The other thing I would encourage you to do with a reluctant reader or a struggling reader is don't give up. If they don't like the first book or the next book or the first 27 books you present to them, keep trying. Look for interests that they already have. Try to find something that already they enjoy learning about. See if you can find a book on that topic, and don't give up. It took me forever to find a book that one of my daughters would enjoy, and once I did, I felt like throwing myself a party. I was so excited the very first time she had a book that she was reading without me telling her to read outside of assigned reading time. That was such a joy, and it took dedication and perseverance and not giving up until I found that magical title that connected with her imagination. And with this, one way you can do this is just go to the library and try to find as many different kinds of books as you can that you think might capture their imagination, and bring them home and then let them choose the book. I even do this with my youngest son. I've always done this. There are some things, yes, I will assign to a child at different times to read, maybe related to our history or science. But I really love giving them that freedom to choose themselves. And that may mean that half or 3/4 of the books I check out do not get read, and that's okay. By spreading that feast in front of them and letting them be able to choose which book they're going to read next, I think that really helps your reluctant reader. Here are just a few practical tips too when it comes to opening up a book and trying to decide if it's going to be a good fit for your child where they are. If they're still beginning to read or they struggle to read, I have found that even if I find a book that the words are decodable, my child could decode those words, but there are too many words on the page or the font size is too small, it automatically overwhelms their brain and they won't want to try. They already think it's too hard for them, even though they technically, I know they could decode those letters. So look for books with larger font size when you're first starting. There are fewer words to a page, plenty of white space, illustrations, of course, these are all good ideas. And so especially for your early readers who are just beginning the process, make sure they're not visually overwhelmed. Also be careful with some of the beginning reader books you'll find in the library. I've seen some of the pre-reader books that they make no sense to me because there's nothing phonetic about the words in those books. They're a bunch of sight words and rule breakers. That was what we would call them, rule breaking words. And so if you are pursuing a phonetic approach to reading, just flip through a book real quick and see, has my child learned the rules associated with these words, or is it going to be more frustrating to them? Not all beginning reader books are created equal. And speaking of phonics, do continue to practice phonics rules, phonograms, spelling rules with your child as needed. Our family has found great success with All About Spelling for my struggling readers and struggling spellers, and so I really encourage you to continue to reinforce those phonetic rules, which will help both as they decode with their eyes and then as they do their own writing. Okay, but I know you're like, great, Amy, that was a bunch of great tips. Thanks so much. But we want some book recommendations. I have so many stacked here. This is not even all the ones I could show you. I'm just going to run through a few, and I'll put those titles in the video description, so check that out. And I would love for you to crowdsource titles that have been a good fit for your struggling readers as well, so please put those in the comments. So I really want this to be an engaging place where people can be encouraged and find new suggestions. I should also let you know that my friend Katie, who is a fellow contributor in our online homeschool community, Made to Homeschool, but Katie from Life in the Mundane is also doing a video on this same topic today, and so I know she's going to have amazing things to share and lots of good book recommendations as well. So I will put the link to her video in the description as well, so after you finish this one, make sure you check out Katie's. Okay, are we ready for some book recommendations? I have actually found that old books, old early reader books that I've found in thrift stores, library book sales, actually are often better fits for my children than some of the modern readers. Some of that is because I think actually they're more like phonetics, they're levels, like it makes more sense with the language and the wording that they choose. And also the stories are just better quality. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all about cotton candy literature and getting your child to just practice reading with their eyes, even if it's, a Ninjago or a Marvel book, okay? I'm not ashamed to say my children have read the fairy books, the Disney fairy books or whatever. That being said, I would prefer that most of their reading be a little bit higher quality literature. So here are a few that we have found. This is actually a science book. Greg's Microscope. Okay, this is Little Black a Pony. Now you may recognize the author Walter Farley from the Black Stallion series, but this is a great book, and let me show you in here what I mean when I talk about not too many words on a page, plenty of white space, and the font is nice and big. There's also beautiful illustrations. Okay, so when my child opens this book, there's not too many words on this page. So they're like, I can do that. Okay, I can read that. All right, a few other authors to look into are, oh, I dropped that one. A few other books to look into would be Clyde Robert Bulla, Arnold Lobel. This one, I'm sure you probably have seen this one before, Sam the Minuteman by Nathaniel Benchley. Robert Quackenbush has written some early readers. And then if you're looking for something a little bit more advanced from that, my son has really enjoyed reading the McBrooms series by Sid Fleischman, but I will say these books would actually generally be too hard for him. So this gives me another little bonus tip here. Our family, I've read these books aloud, this series aloud, multiple times. So you'll notice this is way more words on a page than my son would generally feel comfortable reading. But because I've read this series aloud so many times, he feels comfortable. It's like familiar. He kind of knows what's going to happen. He doesn't know it word for word like a small toddler might know a picture book, but he's familiar enough with it where he was willing to do something much harder than he would normally try. So there's another little tip. Don't be afraid to have your child practice reading with their eyes, something they've read many times before with their ears or have heard read aloud to them. That can be a really great stepping stone. We have been fans of the Henry and Mudge series since my oldest was learning how to read. So I love these books by Cynthia Rylant. So you have her original Henry and Mudge series. There's like dozens of books in this series. Then she wrote the Annie and Snowball series. Annie is Henry's cousin. So more books. And then there's actually a Puppy Mudge series where the words are even simpler. So this is quite simple to read, and then you can gradually graduate up to something a little bit more complicated here with the Henry and Mudge series. So really recommend these books. Our library has, like I said, dozens and dozens of this series by Cynthia Rylant. Cynthia Rylant has also written another good series, the Poppleton series. Actually, there are several beginning reader books that Cynthia Rylant has written, so I would definitely recommend checking those out. These are in the beginning reader section. She has some early chapter books that will be more in your juvenile fiction section of your library, but definitely an author to look into. Okay, another wonderful author who has written books for older children. If your child is ready to start chapter books a little bit longer, I highly recommend the Mercy Watson books by Kate DiCamillo. Okay, so the original series, you'll see that there's a few more words on the page, but the font size is still large, and there's plenty of white space on the page, as well as really fun illustrations. It's a silly story. My son is currently working through a lot of these Mercy Watson books. And what I love is once your child gets comfortable and interested in the characters in the Mercy Watson series, the author has also written a slightly more complicated chapter book, but still beginning chapter book series, set in the same neighborhood, same characters, but more words on the page, kind of gearing that child up for the next step of their reading journey. Now, those have all been primarily fiction stories, but don't forget that nonfiction counts too. In fact, one of my reluctant readers is a big fan of biography and memoir. And so I know that actually if I can find something in that sweet spot, she's much more likely to read a very complicated book than if I find what I would think would be a lot more enjoyable, a fun story that's just not going to interest her as much. So isn't it wonderful that there are beginning readers that are science-based? You have some that are literally going to be in the beginning reading section, okay? But I absolutely adore this series. My youngest son has read so many books in this series this year. It's the Let's Read and Find Out series. So each book is a different author, different topics. Here's just a few examples. Here's one about the ocean. There's one about animal tracks. There's one about seeds growing. So you can find so many books in that series. And if you have a child who's really fascinated by animals or science, those kinds of topics, look for nonfiction. It's still giving them that opportunity to practice reading with their eyes, but in a format with a topic that's maybe a little bit more intriguing to them. It would be terrible if I neglected two last early chapter books. These are going to be a little bit more advanced possibly, but that is the Nate the Great series, a really wonderful early chapter book for children. You can see there's many more words on a page here, but still the white space, it feels achievable for a beginning reader. And there's dozens in that series too. That's the other thing. If you can find a series that grabs your child's imagination, then it's great, because once they like one, you have several books they're probably going to like. And then my daughter, who I could not find a book that she would read, this is the series that eventually grabbed her attention. This is the first book I remember her reading when I didn't make her read. It was the Kingdom of Renly series. And it's by Jordan Quinn. So we haven't read all the books now in the series. She continues to write more books in this series, but I can at least espouse the first handful. You could have simple illustrations, words on the page here. So I know that was so many books, so many recommendations. I will try to catalog all of those things and type them up for the video description. But I just want to encourage you that if you have a child that is slow to read or it's not their favorite thing, it doesn't mean that they're not going to be a reader. Remember, they can still read and love words with their ears. And it doesn't mean that they'll never find a book that interests them. Just be patient. do that hard work of bringing home lots of different ideas, different possibilities, seeing what sparks their imagination, and just do a little bit every day. I often tell homeschool moms that the imperfect thing you actually do is better than the perfect thing you never start. A lot of times as homeschool moms, we want to do this like big, glorious, huge thing. And sometimes what we need to do is we need to do something simple, and we just need to do it faithfully every day. So don't expect your struggling, reluctant reader to read, a stack this tall of books by the end of the school year. But maybe set a more achievable goal. 15 minutes with their eyes every day, or whatever, works for your child. And those little tiny baby steps really add up. You may be surprised how much your child is able to read, how much they've improved just by those small baby steps. So don't despise the days of small things. Do something simple. Do it every day, a little bit. Do it with joy. Do it with peace. Model a love for words and language for your children. And I hope that you will also have a year filled with beautiful words and beautiful reading. While you're here, if you would take a moment to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my future videos, make sure you are checking out as well my playlist for the Homeschool Conversations podcast. I actually have interviewed several guests dealing specifically with the topic of homeschooling with dyslexia and learning challenges, so I will put those links below as well. And of course, my friend Katie from Life in the Mundane, I mentioned earlier, she's an incredible resource on all things special needs, homeschooling, and so I know you're going to want to follow her as well, get lots of great ideas and resources. Until next time, happy homeschooling!